I was thinking, since we are meeting every week, to conduct these talks on the basis of one of the treaties of Shaykh Nasiruddin or Muhakkik Nasiruddin, uh, and it's about spiritual wayfaring, and just talk through his sort of book and the way in which he has arranged his chapters. In any case, he begins with the whole discussion on the beginning of a spiritual journey. He states that the journey begins through having an objective that we strive to attain. The objective in our case is moving from ourselves to God. That in itself necessitates that we understand God to a degree and we make God our focal point, so that as a result of it, the inner motion may start and it may culminate in the finding of God. Now, we do know that our journeys on the face of this earth, especially we who are the faithful ones, is a journey that begins from God and terminates with God. And in the Quran, we find this verse often repeated, or the theme often repeated, that did you forget our meeting on this day? Or that you forgot our meeting and hence you have been forgotten. Or that those who are desirous of meeting with God, then let them follow the example of the Blessed Prophet. So we do know that our journey in this world is one in which we go and move towards God. And it's an internal journey of the mind and of the human soul. Now, as with physical journeys, the psychological and spiritual journeys also require us directing ourselves in the direction of the objective. The objective here is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If we can therefore begin to understand Allah at the initial part of the journey, it is enough to conceptualize God, to say, well, God is the utmost completion of all the beauty that I yearn to attain within my own soul. So He is the most generous, the most forgiving, the most noble, the most dignified. He is the fearless. He is the one who is true to His word. When we specify God as that utmost beauty that our humanity wishes to culminate in, then that becomes our direction. That is who is God for me. That is where I need to be. It is enough to commence the journey with this type of a notion of God. Now, when we have this notion of God, then the question is, well, how do we reach God? One is that we try and emulate the qualities of God. Would God lie for a petty gain? The answer is no. So we will not lie. Is God expected to forgive? The answer is yes. So we will forgive. Would God tolerate? Yes. So we need to cultivate tolerance within us. Would God appreciate the little efforts that others are making? The answer is yes. So we need to appreciate. That's one route to that journey towards God. The other route is that whatever is described as righteous deeds and commanded by God, we diligently uphold them with this conviction that if we believe that there is a God and He's a supremely beautiful God and He has not created us in order to waste us, as Salamullah alayhi, Imam Ali says in Dua Kumail, that I cannot imagine that you have created me nurtured me only to waste me. I know that my priority you want me to succeed, for it also is your purpose that I succeed. So we have to have that confidence in God when we need to know that He wants our best interest. And the Quran indeed says that Muhammad tell them that whatever they have been asked to do in order to do the repayment of your efforts is only for them themselves. And it is only for them to find their path towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So when God says, pray, perform salah, at this very surface level, we need to know that it is something very important. If Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is commanding it, it has to be very important. I might not understand the properties of salah, but there is something in there that is good for me and it awaits my reception. So then we perform our salah. As we perform our salah, we deepen the understanding of salah because salah etymologically means connector and connection. And we begin to realize that salah is a connection with God. And that meaning then begins to dawn upon our minds and upon our hearts. That when I stand before God, I am very mindful that here I am supposed to be connected with God. So the mind does not wander off. The emotions are brought at a still. And as the Blessed Prophet and the Imams say, that when you do not find that your mind is at ease or that your heart is settled, then wait for a while until there is calm within you and then engage in prayer because you are connecting with God. And we are also told that as a preparatory sort of stages for prayers, go and do wudu so that that wudu brings to mind that we are going to be in the presence of God. And wear different clothes, apply perfume, specify a place where you will stand. Of course, this is when we are in the comfort of our houses, not at work and elsewhere. And then, without distraction, stand before God and pronounce the words in a way that you understand them. What that will do is it will enforce this sense of connectedness with God. And if that connection is made 5 times a day, then it becomes a disposition of the soul that it gets connected with God, even between prayers. And even if we fade away between prayers, the second prayer will bring us back. Prayers on time are like taking medicines on time. If we take medicines haphazardly, they do not work effectively. It is only when we take medicine on given intervals that they start having their effect upon the body. So the potency is increased. Now, when we are praying, actually what happens is that that connection with God dims our ego. The only thing that prevents us from reaching out to God is our own ego and our own arrogance, our own want. The first thing we say in prayer is Allah Akbar. Allah is greater. But there is nothing in comparison with God. So why do we say Allah Akbar? The only reason we say Allah Akbar is that we are reminding ourselves that Allah is greater than me. That's all it means. Allah is greater than me. All my preoccupations, all my concerns, all my likes, all my dislikes, all my likes, all my dislikes are less than Allah. And I'm standing before Him. I need to relent and let it all go. When we bow, the ego is being curtailed or crushed. When we do sajda of humility, the ego diminishes. As the ego diminishes, the journey begins to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because we were the only preventions within ourselves from meeting with our God. So Amalun Salih is prominently termed as Salah, connection with God. Then Allah says, fast, restrain yourself from your own self. This restrainment is at a bodily level, which then impacts the mind. Of course, initially we don't understand the meaning and the value of fasting, but continuous fasting on specified days as a disciplined practice brings in mind that notion that I am cutting away from my own self. And that is again cutting away from the ego so that the soul may yield to God. Similarly, Amalun Saleh are all the beautiful things that Allah commands us through Himself. When you speak, speak calmly. When somebody wrongs you, forgive them. When you say anything, be mindful of saying the truth and not transgressing the boundaries. When you walk upon the earth, walk softly. When you spend, be slightly economical. Don't feed your ego as much as it wants to be fed. When you are asked to give in the way of Allah and trust Allah that He will give more to you. When you make a promise, make sure you fulfill it. When your parents talk with you, do not answer back. Your parents are an opportunity for you. Do good to them excessively. When you transact, do not be eager to earn money. Be eager to part with your goods for the sake of Allah to the other person for something less, so that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala may compensate for the lack that you receive from the other person. So Amalun Saleh, therefore, envelopes every activity of our existence. This Amalun Saleh, therefore, what it does is it refines our motion towards God and our appreciation of God. When we refrain from things that God has asked us to refrain from, for example, do not shout out when you're talking. The worst sound is the braying of a donkey. Do not lie. Do not curse. Do not mock. Do not swear. Do not call each other names, for they are hurtful. When we abstain from things that God is saying abstain from, these are all known as righteous deeds. What they do is they bring the ego within a state of check. When the ego is contained, the soul becomes freer to expand and to receive the light of God. When we cross this particular level of faith, our journey begins to accelerate because the mind now wants to see God in a more accurate manner. So we reflect upon nature and we see how beautifully the nature is balanced, how precise everything is, how meticulous things are. So we study nature, we read books, we look at programs that discover nature for us or that talk about nature for us, like the National Geographic or other documentaries that we have that talk about the animal kingdom, the plant kingdom, the ecology, the formation of the tectonic plates, the volcanoes, the evolution of the earth. It is here then that the mind gains a much greater appreciation of God, that this God is indeed a supreme God, all knowing, all capable. When the faith is refined to this level, the heart begins to lose its anxiety, its fear, its apprehension, its regrets. One of the things that bars us on the journey is the regret of the past and the regret of not achieving our aspiration and the regrets of only if. But when we study nature at large and we see how wonderfully and beautifully it is balanced, we will know, oh, the one who plans. No one can plan better than you. I turn to you today. Had it not been for the turbulent journey through which I have come to you, I may not have awoken to you. So all the past that I regretted, I thank you for it has all brought me to this point of awakening to you. Everything at once makes sense. Everything fits so perfectly. When the mind opens to God, we begin to lose fear, regret, past mistakes, past failures. We come to a point where we realize that the only impediment from moving swiftly to God is our lack of forgiveness of ourselves. So at this point here, we begin to forgive ourselves. Once we forgive ourselves, then the flight towards God takes place. As the flight towards God commences, what happens is that Allah says, as for those who believe, Allah purges them from darkness and brings them into light. What happens here is that that which was acknowledged at the level of the mind through study of nature, through rational arguments, now begins to be felt at the level of the heart. We begin to feel the touch of God. His love melts us away. His majesty terrifies us. And both of these things exist and coexist simultaneously. It is here where the faith becomes extremely refined. And our journey to God becomes extremely swift. But in all these stages that we have explained, faith may leave the heart at any point if we do not persevere with righteous deeds, with all the dictates. The only time the faith becomes very stable, as we will talk next week, is when we cross a few other thresholds where the light of the divine penetrates the heart and we begin to live in the presence of God. That is the only point where the faith is unwavering. But even there, if we are not mindful of God, we can make a slip even at that fine point of refined understanding of God and being in the presence of God. Look at Iblis. He was in the presence of God, communicating with God. He did not realize, maybe to what extent, there still remained ego and arrogance in his soul. And that ray of arrogance was enough to cause his damnation until the day of Qiyamah and beyond. So we have to be constantly, perpetually mindful of God and commit ourselves to Amalun Saleh. I'll finish on this point that, of course, we do make slips, we do make mistakes, we do sin, we do behave in a way that is not very noble or not very decent. That is to be seen as a temporary setback. It is not to be seen as failure. Because if it is seen as failure, we will perpetuate it and the regressive cycle will ensue. It's to be seen as a momentary setback. And this is the very reason why Allah says He is Tawwab, the often returning and the often forgiving, because He knows on the journey we will make mistakes at every step that we take. So we have that. in mind as well. I will stop there if anybody wants to add anything.
Thank you so much, Sheikh. If anybody has any questions,